Hey, it's Nana here. I'm so glad y'all could stop by. Today we are in we're studying the last week before Jesus' crucifixion. Now, lots of people will call it the last week of Jesus' life. It's not the last week of Jesus' life. It's the last week before his crucifixion. Because we all know, on Easter, he arose, and then later he ascended. So he didn't die. So it's not his last week on earth. It is his last week before crucifixion. Just wanted to say that. Need to get that off my chest. Okay, so Jesus was very busy this week. And he was very busy on Tuesday especially. Now, not one of the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, give us any details of what he did on Wednesday. It's all Tuesday. And Wednesday is just kind of glossed over. So I may do some of Tuesday's in-depth teaching on Wednesday. I'm not going to be silent on Wednesday, just so you know. So let's get to it. Matthew tells us after he cleared the temple, we learned about that yesterday, he cleared the temple and he went back to Bethany and spent the night again. And when he got up early and he was on his way to Jerusalem, he was hungry. Now, Matthew records the story as it happened right then. And then Mark records the story as he had already cursed the fig tree. But this is what happened. It says early in the morning. Now, I know it tells us in the Bible that it was early in the morning. So we know it was early in the morning because the word tells us that. But I also believe it was early, really, really early, because Jesus beat Martha up. I mean, he didn't beat her up, but he got up before her. And the reason why I say that is because Martha had the gift of hospitality and of servanthood. Now, if Jesus is spending the night at my house and cooking is not my gift, I do okay baking, but cooking is really not my gift. My children love my cooking, but I think that's just because I'm their mama. But anyway, if Jesus was spending the night at my house, I don't even know if I would have slept, but I would not have let the Lord leave hungry. Now, I'm not saying that against Martha. I'm just saying that's how early Jesus got up and got out of the house. Because as he was walking from Jerusalem, or from Bethany to Jerusalem, he was hungry. And he went up to the fig tree for a snack, or for breakfast. And there was nothing on that fig tree. Well, he cursed the fig tree, which I always thought was pretty harsh. You know, Jesus, why are you cursing the poor fig tree? Well, here's the thing. He didn't do it because he hated the fig tree. He didn't do it out of anger. He didn't do it for any malicious reason. I believe the reason why he cursed the fig tree is to give a visual lesson to the disciples, because it withered. Now, Mark has a little different twist on it than Matthew does, but all the point being is that this fig tree that Jesus cursed, withered, and it withered from the roots. So it didn't wither from the top down like most plants do. Excuse me. And this is important because most plants will wither from the top down, because the top is the last place to get water. The roots is where they get all the water from. And so it was cut off immediately from its water supply because it withered from the roots. Hang on here. So the disciples were perplexed and amazed, and they were just astonished at this, that Jesus, do you see what you've done? You've made this tree just wither from the roots, just like that. And this is what Jesus tells them. Okay, so he says, I tell you the truth. If you have faith and do not doubt, start that again. I tell you the truth. If you have faith and do not doubt, not only can you do what was done to the fig tree, but also you can say to this mountain, go, throw yourself into the sea, and it will be done. If you believe, you will receive whatever you ask in prayer. That was the whole reason for Jesus cursing that fig tree, was to show, to give a visual to the disciples. Look, if you believe what you ask God for in prayer, you're going to be able to do more than just make this fig tree wither. You're going to be able to say to that mountain, go over there, get in the sea, and it's going to. So that's the fig tree. And then as they were walking along, after the fig tree, they got into Jerusalem, they got into the temple, and Jesus taught a whole lot in the temple. The Pharisees and the Sadducees, of course, were trying to trap Jesus because they wanted him gone, out of the way. They wanted him dead. And so, which I guess that's not a big secret, because that's why we have Easter, or why we have Good Friday, because that's the day of the Crucifixion. And of course, he rose from the dead on Resurrection Sunday, which is Easter. So, I'm going to tell you just a little bit about the Sadducees. The Sadducees believed only in the written law, and they rejected all the Pharisees' oral law. The Sadducees were a ruling class of priests, and so were the Pharisees. All Sadducees were priests, but not all priests were Sadducees, because they only held to the doctrine of law. If it was written, they believed it. So the resurrection and rewards in the future life, because Jesus taught that we would have crowns and we would get rewarded in heaven. And I don't want to get on to all that. And they also did not believe in the existence of angels. Now, the Pharisees all agreed. The Pharisees and the Sadducees agreed on these points. They didn't believe in the resurrection. They didn't believe that we would, back in the Psalms and back in the writings from King David's life, when one of his sons died, he was no longer sad, because he knew that he believed that he would see his son again in a resurrection. Well, the Sadducees and the Pharisees didn't believe that, which is very important later in one of the questions that they asked Jesus. So the Pharisees and the Sadducees were ruling priests. They didn't agree with each other because the Pharisees believed in their own oral traditions, things that they made up somewhere along the line. And they claim they came from Moses, but probably not. And then the Sadducees stuck literally strictly to the written law. And the Pharisees thought eventually this kind of religion took the whole heart and everything out of God's grace. It just took God's grace out of it and said that God's grace was only going to come through the written law, which we all know it can't, because that's why we have Jesus, is because Jesus brought with him, it was always here, but through Jesus we see God's grace and God's mercy and God's forgiveness. So back to Jesus's life on Tuesday, his authority was questioned. He taught a parable of two sons. He had the parable of the bad and evil tenants. He taught about paying taxes. He taught about marriage at the resurrection, which goes back to the Pharisees and the Sadducees, because they were trying to trap Jesus. And they asked him, they had this whole long story, and they wanted to know, there was a woman, in Jewish law, if a man died childless, then his brother married the wife, and their first man child, would be the heir for the dead brother. So in this story that I don't even remember, it's Pharisees or Sadducees. Anyway, they're trying to trap Jesus. And anyway, they said, so this woman married 7 brothers, because the first one died without a child, and it went on and on and on. And Jesus said, you don't even believe in the resurrection, but you don't know God's word either, because in the end, in the resurrection, we won't be married. We won't be given in marriage to each other. We'll be like the angels, which is really hysterical to me. Now that I put it all together, it's pretty hysterical, the answer that Jesus gives them, because 1, y'all don't even believe in the resurrection. Why are you asking this question? 2, we're going to be like angels, which you don't believe in. So it's all kind of tongue in cheek, which I just think is really funny, because I love it when Jesus does that. But he also taught on what the greatest commandment is, which is love the Lord your God. And the second one is like it in love your neighbor as yourself. Because you're going to treat yourself pretty good, aren't you? Yeah. So, and he said on those 2 pegs, hang the rest of the law. So if you are loving the Lord your God with no other gods before him, and that's your main concern, and then your second main concern is to love everybody else like yourself, then there's not going to be a whole lot of wrong that you're going to do. And so those were the 2 main laws. Those are the 2 pegs that all the other laws hung on. And then they wanted to know who the Son of Christ, who the Son was, and who the Christ was. And Jesus talked to them about that, and he said, because they said it was going to be the Son of David. Well, he said, how does David say, the Lord said to my Lord, sit here at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool. And so if David calls him Lord, how can he be his son? So, and the Pharisees and the Sadducees didn't have an answer for that. So, of course, Jesus kind of leaves it there because they don't have an answer for it. Then in Matthew, Jesus gives us 7 woes. And basically they were all to the Pharisees. And they're all to teachers, which really, it doesn't scare me, but it makes me very, I don't want to say timid, but it puts me on point, because it's like, look, girl, you better believe, you better know what you're teaching, and it better be right, because if it's wrong, woe to you. So anyway, and then Mark and Luke record the widow's offering, and she gave all that she had. It was the smallest that anybody had put in that box. So what the picture that I see is Jesus is in the temple, and he's teaching, and he's teaching these Pharisees. He's teaching anybody who'll listen. He's teaching his followers. He's got these Pharisees and Sadducees, which are the Jewish ruling class, the high priests. And so they're trying to trap Jesus. But as all this is going on, Jesus' eye catches the offering box. And he catches this little poor old widow woman who puts in the 2 smallest coins, the 2 smallest denominations. It was the smallest denomination, it's less than a penny put together, these 2 little coins. And he sees her, and he says, she put more in than anybody else. All these rich people who made this big show of all the money they were putting in wasn't as much as what she put in, because she put in all that she had. She was not going to have money for dinner that night or for whenever, because she put in her all. Our gift back to God, our gift to God, may not be as much as Joe Schmo down the way, but if we give what we have, she gave out of what she had. And she gave all that she had. And that gift by God was considered more than anybody else's. So don't compare. Then